For more videos for CS336, you could take a look at Sarai Studies, link in the description box below. The link to the site will be in the description box below. Now the first thing we want to do is download Eclipse, so let's go ahead and click on this link over here. You want to scroll down until you see Eclipse IDE for Enterprise Java and Web Developers. If you are in CS111 and you're just coding in regular Java, then Eclipse IDE for Java developers works just fine. But if you're in CS336, we are dealing with a project that involves a website, so we want to have this IDE that allows us to do things with websites. So because I have Windows, I'm going to click on this one right here, and then I'm going to click download, and then we'll wait. Now that it's done downloading, you want to click open the zip file, and you can see that it's a zip folder, so what you want to do is extract the information from there, but I want to put it in my PC. So I'm going to go to users, my account, and then I'm going to go to downloads and drag this folder into here, and then I'm going to right click and extract all, and click extract. And then you'll see it extracted, so you want to click on it, click on this folder, and you'll see Eclipse, click on that. Let's click launch, and then wait. And finally, we have our IDE for Enterprise Java and Web Developers. Now we want to go to File, New, and then select Dynamic Web Project. And then let's give the project a name. I'm going to do CS336, and then I'm going to click Finish. Let me close this up. And I can see my project folder CS336. So at this point we've downloaded Eclipse, but the question is, where does this fit in our entire project? Well, our project is made up of 3 tiers. We have the presentation tier, also known as the front end, and that's just the website, the user interface where a user can go and interact visually with your program. The second tier is called the middle tier, and that's where your server goes. And specifically, we use Apache Tomcat server. And then we have the data management tier, which is just the database server, and we're using the MySql database server. The idea is that a user on a website can request some information. The server receives that request, and the server itself does whatever the JSP files tell it to do. So the Java server pages, these pages are literally the exact same thing as an HTML page, except that you can just write Java in them. And there are instructions to the server about what to do if you are receiving requests from the user, and also instructions on what happens if you need to send back some data to the website, to the user. But if you need data, these instructions tell the server to get data from the MySql database server, and the MySql database server returns some data, and these instructions again tell the server if they should send it back or not. And so this is just the front end, and this is the back end, right? Anything that's not UI, that's not user interface, is just back end. And so far we managed to download Eclipse, which is just an IDE, the place to store these files here. But remember, these files are just instructions to the server that's going to serve data to the user or receive data. And so what we're missing at the moment is, yes, these files themselves, which we will get to later, but we're actually missing the server. So how about we download this Apache Tomcat server and then connect it to the IDE that will hold these JSP files. Now to connect this IDE to a server, we want to go to servers down here. It says no servers are available. Click this link to create a new server. So we're going to go ahead and click that link. We want to use Tomcat Apache, so let's go to Apache, scroll all the way down till you see the latest version. Let's do Tomcat version 11 server, click next, and then we can just download the server straight from here. So first we want to specify where we want to install this. So let's go browse, and I'm just going to install this in the same folder that I have the Eclipse in. So I'm going to select that folder, and then I'm going to click download and install, click finish, and again just go to the same folder that we just selected. So users, smart, select folder. And then it's going to say the specified Tomcat installation directory does not exist, and that's because it hasn't finished downloading yet. So just give it a second, and then you'll see the error go away, and you'll see that it allows you to click on finish. And now you see a folder with servers. If you click on it, you see the Tomcat version 11 server, and also in servers, you see Tomcat version 11 server. You can see that the server is stopped, and the reason why is because we haven't ran the server. And actually, there's nothing to run at all. So let's make sure we have something to run. So if we go to the CS336 folder, we have all of these folders, and that's because when we went to File, New, we click Dynamic Web Project, and that comes with all of these folders. So we want to go to the source folder, go to the main, go to the web app, and then right click, go to New, and click JSP file. So again, JSP stands for Java Server Pages. So we're going to create one called index.jsp and click finish. And now you see this pop up. Like I said, it's basically an HTML file, with the only difference being that you can write some Java code inside of it. Now, if you're not familiar with HTML, I will have a separate video on HTML basics. and how to read these lines, what they mean. But for now, you can think of them as boilerplate code in the same way that you think of public static void main string args when you start a Java file. It's just boilerplate code. So every time we start a new HTML file, we have to write this. What's really important is that anything that the user is going to see on the site is going to be inside these body tags. So let me go ahead and just indent these little things here. So think of an HTML document as an actual Google Doc. So when you open up a Google Doc, you want to write a heading, and you can also do a heading in this HTML document by just using an h1 tag, h for heading, 1 for heading of size 1, and let's say hello world. And that's it. So let's do Control S to save, and then let's click on this run button. Select the server that we want to run this on, which is this one here, click finish, and then it's going to automatically pop up the site and we can see hello world. Now notice the path, it has localhost and then port 8080, and then it has CS336, so that means it's inside the CS336 folder, and then it's at index.jsp, so inside the CS336 folder, it's over here. Now let's see what happens if we remove this index.jsp, click enter. It's still running index.jsp, and the reason why is because by default, Tomcat server and other servers always look for a file called index.jsp. That's like their go-to file that they run. So what happens if we rename this file to something else? Let's call it hello.jsp. If we go back here and reload, we get an error. And the reason why is because right now, the server is just going to the project folder, CS336, and since no file after that is being specified, it's looking for an index.jsp file that is not there. So the only file that your server will serve without being specified is index.jsp. Otherwise, you have to go in here and write hello.jsp in order for the server to actually serve you hello.jsp. Now, another quick HTML tip I wanted to give you is if you look at the tab here, you see that it says insert title here. So you can fix that by just going over here in the title tag and changing it to whatever you want. Let's say CS336, saving that. And if you go back and reload, we can see that now it says CS336. So let's go ahead and rename this back to index.jsp. Now, so far we've only written HTML. So where does the Java part come in? Well, in the same way you can write HTML, you can write Java. So we use a special tag, do an angle bracket, and then a percentage sign. And the only thing that's different is we're allowed to use an object called out. And it's an object that we don't have to create a new instance of. We can just use it as is. And then it has print ln, and then we can say hello world, and then semicolon. And if we save this and go back here, we can see the hello world from the HTML, and we can see the hello world from the Java. We can even go further. We can say int num is equal to 20, semicolon, and also say hello world and then put num in there. And let's also do a space, save this, and if we go back here and reload, we can see now hello world 20. Now both of these things are static information, static as in it doesn't change. Anytime that the server serves this page index.jsp, it's going to serve hello world as a heading, and it's also going to serve hello world plus whatever number we put here. It could be 40, it could be 50, like we could change it manually, but the fact is that no matter what the user does, it's going to be whatever number that we put here, period. So dynamic information, dynamic as in information that can be changed depending on the user's actions, is like having a variable, but instead of it just being static, like whatever we put in here, it's a variable whose value we get from an outside source like a database. So the question is, how do we get access to that database in the first place? So at this point, we have one JSP file. We managed to set up the server that will serve what our JSP file wants the user to see on the website, which is right now localhost 8080. And now the only thing that's missing is connecting the MySql database server. Because what if our website is like a bank and the user can request how much money they have in their bank? Well, then the user requests that to the server. The JSP files have instructions telling the server what to do if that happens. Maybe the instruction is to retrieve that data, that amount from the database, and then return that data back and eventually gets back to the user. But right now there is no database storing that information. So let's see how we can set this up. Now, the first thing is to recognize that Java can't speak SQL and vice versa. So we need a translator in between the two. And that translator is called the JDBC.Driver, and it's literally just a file we have to download. So you want to click on this link, and then it will bring you over here. So as for the operating system, you want to select platform independent because your grader is going to have to download your stuff, and you don't know what operating system they use, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, or so on. So you want to make sure that your translator will work regardless of the operating system being used. You want to download the zip folder, so click download here, and then it's going to ask you to log in now or sign up. Just say no thanks, just start my download. And once it's done, you can open it up by clicking on it. And if we go inside this folder, the only thing that we need is literally just this file. So in Eclipse, what we want to do is go inside the CS336 folder, go into the source, go into the main, web app, this folder, and inside the library folder, we want to drag this file into there, but you see that we can't, and that's because this file is currently in a zipped folder. So you just want to go to downloads where it downloaded, and then right click, extract all, click extract. So this is basically unzipping it. And then you'll see the unzipped version. So let's go ahead and delete the zipped one, go inside here as well, and then we can finally drag this file into the lib folder. Click copy file, click OK, and now you have your connector, your JDBC driver, and then you can just delete this folder off your computer. Now this file, this translator, this connector, this JDBC driver is what allows us to communicate with the MySql database server. So when the MySql server serves us data from the database that we're going to create, we are able to understand that data. And when we send data to the server will be able to understand us. And so now the obvious missing part is, how do we get the MySql server? Now we want to install MySql server, but we also want to install MySql Workbench. For the same reason we download VS Code to write code, because it makes our lives easier instead of writing code in the terminal, because remember we can write Java, Python in the terminal, we write it in VS Code. It's just a nice visual interface where we can see everything more clearly. In the same way, MySql Workbench is that nice visual interface where we can write SQL queries, look at the results, look at the database, easier than we would if we had to do it all through the terminal. So there's a few options we have for downloading both of these. We can do it all in one go, but this is only a Windows option, and this is using MySQL installer for Windows. So if we click on this link, we'll be brought over here, and you want to install the one with the biggest file size, so click download here. But note that it says MySql 8 is a final series with MySQL installer. That means that this will only work for MySql 8. The latest version right now that's official is 8.4. And so if you want newer versions, you're going to have to use option 2, because MySQL installer for Windows will no longer work for versions 8.1 or later. So if you want versions 8.1 or later, like 8.4, 8.3, or so on, you're going to have to download them separately. So if you do this, if you click on this download MySQL server, you'll be brought over here. 9.5 is the latest innovation version. It's kind of like an experiment, but 8.4 is like their stable one. So with this version, you want to do the MSI installer if you have Windows, but if you have Mac, you want to do the DMG archives, but you want to do the biggest file, so that would be the second one over here. And then to download Workbench, you would click on this link. If you have Windows, just download it over here. If you have Mac, you go in here, download again the DMG file. You want to do the biggest one, so that's the second one over here. As for the versions for this project, they don't matter as long as you use version 8.0, 21 or above, as stated in the instructions that Garcia gave. If that changes in the future, then obviously follow those instructions. So because I have Windows, I'm just going to take the easy option, download both all in one go, do the 8.044 version. This is a perfect example of a version you don't want to take because it's below 8.021, 5.744, that's not good. You want to do 8.044. And then click the version with the biggest file size, that's this one, click download, and then we wait. Once we're done with that, let's open it up, click OK. Then we see that the installer pops up. As for the setup type, we want to do a full setup, a full installation. If you just leave it as server only, we'll only install MySQL Server, but we want MySQL Server with MySQL Workbench, and so we want to do full, click on next, and then you see that it has a server, it has the Workbench, it has a few other things. Let's click execute so that it goes ahead and install those. Once everything is complete, we can click on next, continue clicking on next, leave it as a development computer, continue clicking on next. Like Garcia said, if this was the real world, you would use encryption for your passwords, but it's not, so let's just use the legacy authentication method, click next. Now it's asking you to make up a password. When I tell you, you need to write this password down, because if you forget, you will lose everything. Like, you'll have to delete everything because there's no way to access your databases without the password. So make sure you store your password somewhere. As for me, I'm just going to do a little dummy password. You could always change it later. I'm going to do 0000, click next. You don't have to change anything. Continue clicking next, next, and then execute. Finally, click finish, click next, click finish, click next, put your password in, click check, and then click next, execute, finish, next again, and then finally click finish. You could see both the terminal and MySql Workbench pop up. Again, you can write MySQL here in the terminal, but we downloaded MySql Workbench for a reason, and that's to write MySQL here so we could visually see everything. So down here we have connections. You can add a connection by clicking the plus sign, give it a name. I'm going to do CS336. This here is localhost. That's a localhost address, and the port is going to be 3306, so keep that in mind. because we're going to need this when connecting to the database. Click test connection, and then this is where you're going to put in your password. So mine is 0000. Click OK, and then click OK here so that it pops up here. Now, if you click on it, this is what you'll see. Now, I will have a separate video on SQL Basics, but for now, this is just setting up the project. So I'm going to give you a simple setup. Let's say that, again, our website is for a bank. So let's just create a simple table where it has the user's name, the user's age, and the amount that they have in their bank. So on the site, you want to scroll all the way down until you see SQL code to create database and table, and just go ahead and copy that. So let's do Control-C. And then back over here, let's paste it in. And all this is going to do is create a database called bank database. It's going to create a table called users, and it will have attributes or fields, name, age, and the amount that the user has at the bank. And then we're inserting some data into the user's table. So every tuple here is a row, is a person's or a user's data. So we have their name, their age, and the amount that they have in the bank, and so on. And finally, we're selecting the entire table. We want to select everything. So that's what the star means from the user's table. So let's go ahead and run this by clicking the lightning bolt. And then you can see the table. You see the name, age, and amount, and you can see the 3 users we added. So we managed to create the bank database and the users table and so on. So now the question is, how do we get access to this database from our Java world? Well, we need to connect to the MySQL DB Server that will serve us data from this database and will allow us to also serve data into this database or update data or delete data and so on. So the big question is now, well, how do I connect to the MySQL DB Server? Let's go and move on to Eclipse again. Let's delete everything inside of here. So the first step is authentication. You need to give this JSP file the link to your database, also known as a database URL. So we're going to call it DB URL, and it's going to be of data type string. We will also need the username, so we'll do user and then data type string, and the password, also of data type string. For the URL, it's going to be JDBC and then a colon, then MySQL, and then you want to put localhost 3306. This port is what you saw when creating a connection. If we go ahead and open this up again, we'll see that if we create a connection here, you see port 3306, that's what we use. And then finally, the name of your database. So ours was bank_db, then the username was root. When installing MySql Workbench, that was the username that was set up. And then finally your password. Mine was just 0000, so that's what I'm going to put in here. So that's just the information that you need to connect. The second step is to actually connect to the MySQL database server. So you just need one line. We're going to create a variable called con, so con for connection, of data type connection, which is saying, hey, this is going to be a connection. And then we're going to use a class called driver manager. And this class has a method called getConnection, and all it needs is a URL to the database, the username, and the password. So we'll pass in the database URL, the username, and the password. And just so we know that it's working, let's print out connection successful. Let's Control-S to save. And finally, let's go back to the browser, reload, and we see connection successful. So it worked. Now the last thing you want to do is make sure to close out the connection. You'll be able to find this code here under connection code. Obviously, if you're using GitHub, you don't want to just type in your password. You want to create another file that contains your password, then do a .getignore. That will ignore that file once you upload it to GitHub, so that your database password doesn't get leaked. But anyway, that is how you connect to the MySQL database server. And now that we're connected, we have access to the bank database specifically because that's the one that we selected. And we know that the bank database has the users table, so we also have access to that table. So how about we try to find or query from the database the total amount of money the users have in the bank, and then try to display that here on the site. So let's go ahead and get rid of this line here. You want to do this before the connection closes. So in the same way that you would write select the sum of the amount of money from the users table, and then run that and get an answer, it's $12,501.25. We could just take this query, copy it, and just create a string called SQL query or just SQL and set it equal to your query. So now our goal is for this query to reach the MySQL database server. So we have a connection that's open, so we're going to take that connection, and that connection has a method called createStatement. So this createStatement method is basically a fancy way of saying, hey, I'm going to create a messenger that's going to take this query across the connection until it reaches the other side of the connection, which is where the database server is. And we're going to call this messenger statement, and we're just going to give it data type statement. So right now we just created the messenger, but we want to tell it what to do. At the end of the day, we want it to go through the connection, reach the end, and execute the query, right? Give it to the database server. So we're going to take this statement, and we're going to do a method called execute query. What query? That's our SQL query. So that's what's going to go in here. And once this messenger executes the query, gives it to the database server, the database server is going to return back what we call a result set. So we're going to call it rs, and we're going to give it data type result set. So what this is a set of results, in other words, a table, but we don't actually have access to the full table. This acts as a pointer to each row of the table, and it starts before the first row. So let's see how we could use it. Now I know that my resulting set, my resulting table only has one row and one column, because when I queried for exactly one value. It's just the sum of all the money that the users have in the bank. So it's just going to be the total amount of money in the bank. That's just one number. So it's going to be stored in one column and in one row. And because I know that this acts as a pointer to the table that in this case only has one column and one row, and it starts before the first row, I want to get to that first row. So I'm going to take the resulting set, my table, and I'm just going to do the .next method, which moves a pointer down to the first row. And then if I did it again, if I did rs.next again, so if I had 2 of these, it would move it to the second row. If I had 3 of these, it would be the third row and so on. But I don't have a second row. I just have one row because there's only one value that I queried for. And that one value, I know that it's a decimal because when we created the schema, we made the data type of the amount a decimal. So how do we interpret that in Java? Well, it's a double. It's not going to be an integer. So we're going to do a variable called total sum, make it a double, and then we're going to set it equal to the resulting set. And because we're already at the first row, I want to specify what I want to get. Well, I just want to get this value here that is a double. So I'm going to do the .getDouble method, and then I want to specify the column. And since there's only one column, I'm going to say the first column. So 1 for the first column. And I want this value because I want to be able to display it on the site. So let's do simple out.print statement, total amount of money in the bank, and then plug in that variable in there. And finally, not only do we want to close the connection, but we also want to close the resulting set and the statement, the messenger. Finally, let's do Control S to save, and then back over here, let's reload, and we see that the total amount of money in the bank is $12,501.25, which is exactly what we see over here in MySql Workbench. Now again, I want to reiterate that this is the minimal amount of code that you need. You could do better by doing better error handling. You can do some if statements to see if the connection works, some try and catches, if there is a next row, and so on. And so now for the project, we know that you have to do a login page. So you can just go into this web app folder, right click, new file, do JSP file, call it login.jsp. And then here you would write some HTML code to create a form. And then you would do some SQL queries to retrieve the password given a username from the database and compare it to the password that the user entered, and so on. So now the rest is up to you. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next.